Okay, hi BookTube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing okay. Today I'm going to be carrying on with my library tour for 2024, and we're up to this shelf you can see just here of Penguin Classics. I've covered these a few times, I think, in past library tours, but there might be one or two things in here that I haven't really shown yet, and I think I'll just carry on with it for the sake of being a completionist. And we'll start off with these ones on the top. I think you will have seen all of these at some point. These little black classics. I've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I've got 10 of them. There are quite a few more. And I generally quite like them. They're good as a kind of first taste of an author, or if you're sort of in the mood for something, or a particular author, but you don't want to dive into something massive, then these are often pretty good. So we've got As Kingfishers Catch Fire by Gerard Manley Hopkins, which I really liked. I really love the sort of the rhythm and the kind of oddness of his poetry. He's just one of those poets that you sort of recognise straight away. And I'd love to get more of his poetry. It's been quite hard to find an edition that, even though it's longer than this, actually has a substantial amount of his poetry. And they're often sort of padded out with his journal entries, his diaries, and things, which is okay. Yeah, I hope to get a bit more of his poetry. Then we've got the saga of Gunnlaug Serpent Tongue, an Icelandic saga. I do have this in my Penguin Deluxe Sagas of the Icelanders volume. But I think I picked this up before I picked that up, and it's one of the sagas I haven't read yet. We've got The Eve of St. Agnes by John Keats, so some of his most famous poems are in there. We've got Hafez, The Nightingales Are Drunk, and this was a great example. I read this. It's a selection of Hafez's poems translated by Dick Davis, and then I found the larger Penguin collection that this had been taken from, which is generally what they do. So anything in here will be part of a larger Penguin classic normally. Then we've got Edith Wharton, The Reckoning. I think this has got two short stories. It's got The Reckoning and something else, Miss Manstry's View. And I haven't read either of these, but I've read The Age of Innocence, and I really liked The Age of Innocence, so I should probably get to some more Wharton at some point. We've got Goblin Market by Christina Rossetti, which I really love. It's got a bit more of the poetry there. We've got The Night is Darkening Round Me by Emily Bronte, so a selection of Emily Bronte's poetry. With both Emily Bronte and Christina Rossetti, I really need a larger selection of their poems, and Gerard Manley Hopkins as well. Then we've got The Voyage of Sir Francis Drake Around the Whole Globe by Richard Hakluyt, or Hakluyt. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his name. I've started this before and I just didn't finish it. I keep forgetting that technically this is a DNF for me, but I would like to read it and actually read the larger work that that's from as well. Then we've got O Cruel Alexis by Virgil. And then finally, we've got Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke, which I enjoyed and I'd like to reread eventually. And then onto the Penguin Classics proper, taken through a kind of block at a time to save me stretching. We've got Rashomon and 17 Other Tales by Ryonosuke Akutagawa. I really liked most of the stories in here. Quite a lot at the beginning are set in medieval feudal Japan, and then they kind of move forward, and there's some dealing with the Catholic missionaries and sort of the tensions, I suppose, as Christianity is introduced to Japan. And then there are some sort of later stories set in sort of the early 20th century, around the time that Akutagawa was writing, which were okay. They kind of got much more autobiographical, and he wasn't in a very good headspace. He struggled with depression, and so a lot of that is just going straight into the story. So it was some pretty heavy reading, but a really great short story writer. Um, then we've got Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, which I think is really funny. I'd love to reread Northanger Abbey at some point. I think I've read all of her sort of complete novels now, so at some point I'll need to do a sort of comprehensive Jane Austen reread. Then we've got The House of Ulua by Emilia Pardo Bazan, which, going off the synopsis on the back, it's like not a monk, maybe a priest he's been sent to an estate to put the affairs of this estate back in order. It seems like a lot of the people there are given over to debauchery and libertinism, and it seems quite dark and gothic, and I don't know, kind of reminding me of the Tenant of Wildfell Hall, maybe, or maybe even Wuthering Heights. It's kind of giving me those Bronte sort of vibes, but set in Spain. And this is translated by Paul O'Prey and Lucia Graves. I think she translated the Shadow of the Wind books as well, if I'm remembering correctly. And she's Robert Graves' daughter. Then we've got the Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius, which I would love to read at some point. I borrowed the Confessions by St. Augustine from a friend, so I think once I've finished that, I'll then go over to Boethius. We've got Villette by Charlotte Bronte, which when I read this, I had the flu, I think, and I was in a sort of feverish and delirious state while reading it, which actually for one or two parts of this book it kind of actually fits. So yeah, I always just think of that time when I was really quite ill, whenever I think of Villette. And then we've got Shirley by Charlotte Bronte, which I haven't read yet, and it's a considerable size, a respectable one. Okay, I'm going to do my best to get this so that everything doesn't fall over. We've got the major works of Sir Thomas Browne. He was just intrigued and interested by everything, and so it's kind of like having a encyclopedia just kind of thrown at you when you're reading his essays. But he's a brilliant writer, a brilliant stylist, and even if you're not really understanding a word of what he says, there is something really enjoyable to just spending time with him and just seeing what he has to say. Another added curiosity to this is, I think in the notes at the back somewhere, there are moments when, or maybe it's in the footnotes, there are moments when you get Samuel Taylor Coleridge's notes to his copy. So someone's gone through Coleridge's edition and gone through all his annotations and then added them as notes to this edition, which is pretty cool. So you're not just getting whatever's sort of going through Sir Thomas Browne's head, but you're also getting whatever's going through Coleridge's head. So it's hopeless, really. Okay, then we have got The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov, which is a really crazy book. It's one of those books that's just out there and crazy, but it's kind of got a tenderness and I don't know, there's just something very caring about the way it's written and about the way that the characters are treated, if that makes any sense. So there's I suppose a sentimentality to it, even though it's crazy and a bit off the rails, and you just have to go with it. Then we've got Anton Chekhov, The Lady with the Little Dog and Other Stories. These are his short stories from 1896 to 1904. So I think there are a few Penguin volumes that sort of span his entire writing life, and so this is just one volume, and I'd be interested, or quite like to get the whole set eventually. And there are lots of stories in here I really like. There's Gooseberries, House with the Mezzanine, Man in a Case I really like Man in a Case, as it's that's the one I'm thinking of. So a lot of these stories are quite they're quite I don't know, melancholic, very quiet. And then I think it is Man in a Case where it's almost like a Gogol story. It's just a very odd, really weird story about just a really strange character, and so it was just different to see another side of Chekhov. So yeah, I quite like this volume, and I'd like to read some more. Then we've got Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe, which I can't really remember anything about, so it'll be one I'd have to reread at some point. Then we've got The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, which is one of my all-time favourite books. Just a great example of sensation fiction, a sort of a gothic mystery, and yeah, I don't know. I have talked about this a fair bit on the channel, and it is one that I need to reread at some point. But yeah, for me, it just sums up everything I like about Victorian literature and about sort of Gothic literature and mystery, sort of mystery stories. So yeah, it's one I'd like to get to again at some point. I'll move this. This is my little jar of pennies, which yeah, I'm realising it's all got the Queen's head on them now, so they'll be out of date at some point if they decide to actually put Charles's head on pennies. We've got The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. I've not read anything by Dumas, so I'd quite like to get this. I did buy this as a present to my wife, so I would feel a bit bad if I if I read this edition before she did. But we got this because we do have another edition downstairs that's quite old, that used to belong to her grandmother. So we got this just so we had a reading copy that wouldn't fall apart, hopefully. Then we've got Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell, which I haven't read. I haven't read anything by Elizabeth Gaskell, so she's a Victorian writer. I mean, her and George Eliot I really need to get to. We've got Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy, which is one of my all-time favourite novels. I suppose in a way like Master and Margarita, even though this isn't a crazy wild book, but it's a very sad book, but it has that care and that sentimentality at the core of it, so it doesn't seem cruel, if that makes any sense. So I think this is a really lovely book, even though it's quite a sad book. Then we've got Notre Dame of Paris by Victor Hugo. I haven't read anything by Victor Hugo yet, but I will get to this eventually, since I do love a fair bit of Gothic fiction, and I haven't read that much Gothic fiction recently. But I will be reading next month Les Miserables, with Classics and Company doing it, and also a few people. We've sort of put together a Voxer group as well, so we can Voxer, sort of an auxiliary group, I suppose. And so I'm going to be reading this in April and maybe into May, because it's quite a chunker. So yeah, I'm excited to actually finally getting around to reading some Victor Hugo. Then we've got The Aspen Papers and The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, which I didn't particularly love. There are sections of both stories that I really quite liked, but on the whole, I still just don't quite get Henry James. Then we've got the Just So stories by Kipling. Let's see how far we can get before any more fall down. Then we've got Pierre and Jean by Guy de Maupassant. I haven't read anything by Maupassant yet either. And this is only, I don't know, about 150 pages. Yeah, so it'll be one I could get to easily, and it has actually really quite a large font for a Penguin Classic. Then we've got Utopia by Thomas More, which is just an odd thought experiment about an ideal society. It's one of my favourite books, more for the questions that it brings up and the influence it's had, rather than the actual society that he's proposing. And it's also I think it's also kind of a satire as well on Tudor society and on sort of European government as well. So yeah, I need to get back to this. I've read it a couple of times, I think, but I'd like to reread it. And in a similar vein, we've got Republic by Plato. And again, it brings up lots of very interesting questions, and I think that's the thing that's so brilliant about it, even if you don't particularly agree with the conclusions. And I'll move this out of the way, little kalimba. Next up, we've got Walter Scott. This is all I've read of Walter Scott to date, and it's Ivanhoe. And again, this is one I would love to reread. I can remember this being quite a romp and a lot of fun. And it's actually, it kind of looks like a fairly chunky Penguin Classic. It's the actual book itself is only about 300 pages, I think. Let's have a look. Yeah, well, just shy of 400 pages, so it's not quite as long as I remember it being. Then we've got Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, another book that would qualify as one of my all-time favourite books. I think I've read this about three times, and I would love to reread it. I should probably reread it much more often than I have been. Then we've got the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Other Stories by Robert Louis Stevenson. I think so far this is all I've read from Stevenson, and again it's one I would like to reread, because I don't know, I can remember feeling a bit disappointed by Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde when I read it, but then when I think back at it, it sounds really interesting and really intriguing. So I kind of want to find out why I had that issue with it. Yeah, it's definitely one that would be worth revisiting and reevaluating. Okay, then we've got The Pillow Book by Shonagon. And this is another book that Classics and Company are going to be reading. It's a year-long reading event run by Micah Cummins and Anne Novella, where I think it's every 6 weeks they have a different classic, so it's not quite a book a month, so you've got a bit more wriggle room to fit it in. And they asked me to be a host for a book, and we went with this one, which is one I'm intrigued by. I'm intrigued by it because it's a Japanese classic that's shorter than The Tale of Genji. So if I enjoy this, then I will get on and actually read The Tale of Genji at some point. Then we've got Phineas Redux by Anthony Trollope. I've heard someone say it redo. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be pronounced. I'm not sure. And this is one of the last Palliser novels. And I've got most of the Palliser novels physically, and if not, I can get them as ebooks quite easily. So I should probably get around to reading some more Trollope at some point. Then we've got Fathers and Sons by Turgenev, which I haven't read yet. I've heard lots of really good things about it, and this is translated by Rosemary Edmonds, and I've heard people say they like her translation of War and Peace and Anna Karenina, and it's got a lecture by Isaiah Berlin in here as well. So yeah, this is one I really need to get to. It's been sort of sitting around waiting for me for about a year. Then we've got, oh dear, then we've got the Letters of Vincent van Gogh. And I keep meaning to just have this as a book I randomly dip into. And I think what I'll do, I just realised this has actually got sort of black and white reproductions of some of the paintings. But yeah, I've been recently reading Kafka's Diaries, and I think once I finally finish that, because I just dip in and out of it randomly, but once I do actually finish it, I'll take a similar tack with this and just have it as a book that's around, so that if I just want to quickly dip into something and read a page or two, then that'll be what I read. Two more to go then. We've got The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, which is really fun. I've read this a few times as well. Yeah, I don't feel that much of a pull to reread it, but I would like to read some more H.G. Wells, because I've just read The Time Machine and The Island of Dr. Moreau so far. And then we've got We by Yevgeny Zemyatin, which is a brilliant dystopian novel. I think the thing people always say about this is that it's the book that probably inspired 1984 by George Orwell, and you can kind of see that. And I think really what I like about this is, so it's written, I think in the sort of early 20s in Russia, so not too long after the revolution and the Civil War. And it's really a criticism of Soviet society and what's sort of going on. And I think what I like about it is that because it's in that sort of Soviet context, it's kind of a bridge between utopian and dystopian literature. Because I suppose I don't really see that much of a difference between a utopia and a dystopia. It's just a matter of perspective, or sort of taking a wider view of it, I suppose. And it's when you're looking at the mechanisms that sort of sustain the utopia that you actually realise it probably is a dystopia. And in this, you can get to the end and you can see it's a dystopian book. But for most of the book, the main character, our narrator, is absolutely sold really on the society that he's living in, and he's challenged, and he has moments when he does want to break out or do something different, although that's mainly because he's attracted to a woman who's a bit of a revolutionary, and so yeah, it's not necessarily you're not getting the full force of what you get in a more modern dystopian book, and so you're getting that utopian flavour through the things he's saying and the way he sees this society, but kind of because of that and because of what happens in the book, you actually see how dystopian it is, if that makes any sense at all. So yeah, I think it's a great bridge between these two branches of literature, which are the same tree. And that's it. So that's most of my Penguin classics. There are others in other locations, yeah, sort of some poetry books that are Penguin classics, and some that are just in other rooms. But yeah, thanks very much for watching. I hope there was at least something interesting in there. And next up, it'll be poetry. Okay, have a great day. Bye bye.